Hello everyone, welcome to Full Moon Movies. There is a curious phenomenon surrounding The Place Beyond the Pines. When it was first released in 2012, it barely made the noise it deserved. Audiences were unsure, critics were divided, and it slipped quietly past the mainstream conversation. But with time, the film found a second life. That is, not through hype, but through people quietly returning to it. I've read some comments from viewers who stayed in the theaters long after it ended, unable to shake the aftertaste. Years later, the film still lived inside them. That kind of staying power is really rare in current movies. And it made me wonder, what kind of movie is this that gave such an emotional gravity, and why it still leaves a lingering imprint even after a single viewing? Now, I believe it's because the story feels grounded in real life disappointment. You know, the kind where people often live through in private lives. The film speaks about free spirit, guilt, anger, heartbreak, broken dreams, and the search for identity. And importantly, it's all about legacy wounds which are left behind. I feel the movie also reflects the collapse of the American dream and the emotional wounds that people inherit without choosing. When a film hit those universal emotional nerves, its initial reception stops mattering. It stays with those who recognize their own fractures in the characters. Now, that emotional resonance begins with Ryan Gosling's portrayal of Luke Glanton, a quiet, wandering man whose longing is expressed through stillness rather than dialogue. For the first portion of the film, Luke exists like a shadow moving through light, and that quietness is part of what draws audiences in. But when he meets Robin, that dynamic actually changes. His posture shifts, the tension in his face deepens, and his silence becomes somewhat volatile. Some might find the jump from a carnival motorcyclist to a bank robber a bit too drastic, but the film is making an honest point that people behave differently with different people, and desperation molds identity in unpredictable ways. Luke doesn't just suddenly become someone else, he becomes the version of himself shaped by pressure, by fear, and by burning need to finally be present for a child he only just discovered. Yet the film avoids turning Luke into a romanticized loner. Director Derek Cianfrance refuses to paint him as a poetic drifter with artistic sadness. Instead, the focus is on cause and consequence, how choices made in moments of fear and impulse ripple through generations. And Gosling plays those moments with a haunting delicacy. His lingering eyes, the soft ache behind his stare, and the way he looks at Romina with the longing and regret. All of this evokes the emotional language of Tony Leung's in Chungking's Express, or even in The Mood for Love. Now, there is something about the way Gosling stands in silence, the way he communicates through subtle glances, that recalls Leung's ability to express the entire inner worlds without moving a muscle. And Eva Mendes, much like Maggie Cheung, plays the counterpart whose quiet sorrow deepens the emotional atmosphere. Their scenes feel drenched in visual nostalgia, as if you really seen this somewhere before, sadness in another life. But Luke's story is only the beginning. When Bradley Cooper's Every Cross enters the narrative, the film shifts from intimate longing to moral consequence. Avery is the opposite of Luke, polished on the surface but with a deep vein for fear underneath. After the shooting that binds their fates, Avery becomes a man who embodies guilt as a living shadow. One of the film's most powerful ironies is how Avery feels more comfortable holding Luke's son than his own. His guilt becomes a barrier between him and his own child, while Luke's absence becomes a strange link between the two families. Now, this subtle emotional fracture is mirrored beautifully in the repeated locations that different generations visit. For example, the diner where Coffee unknowingly shares a quiet moment with Jason years later, the same swimming pool where Avery once spoke with his father, only to later see his own son floating alone, disconnected. These echoes are intentional, revealing how legacy repeats itself across time even when people don't realize it. The supporting characters enrich these themes as well. Marshala Ali's Coffee is one of the film's quiet tragedies. He is the responsible father, the stable presence, The man who gives Romina safety, yet his pain is understated, existing in the margins of the film. Romina herself carries the heaviest emotional burden. She loses Luke twice, if you think about it. First, when he abandoned her unknowingly with the baby, and later when he returned only to die violently. Her life really becomes a map of heartbreak, with coffee as the anchor she clings to, but not necessarily out of love. Even her adult son eventually leaves her with the same emotional rupture she experienced with Luke. It becomes clear that the true tragedy of the film isn't limited to the fathers or sons. In fact, it is also the quiet suffering of the woman, whose emotional landscapes remain affected by the choices of the men around them. In the third act, the focus turns towards the sons, Jason and AJ, and the generational wounds become more painful and obvious. Jason inherits Luke's melancholy and free spirit, yet he also inherits a life of missing answers. AJ carries Avery's entitlement but also his distance. Now their connections feels like fate forcing two bloodlines to confront the consequences of the past. And even though the boys are very different, their interaction highlights something universal, which is like children long for connection even when their parents fail them. The film is unflinching in showing how guilt, silence, and emotional distance shape generations without ever needing to be spoken aloud. Now, what elevates the film further are its unforgettable scenes. From Luke's riding his motorcycle through the towering pines like a lone soul moving through a cathedral, to Avery's stance of confrontation with police corruption, to Jason quietly discovering the truth about his father. Each of these moments is shot with a visual poetry that makes the environment feel alive. Sean Bobbitt's cinematography gives the film a tender stillness, with handheld intimacy and natural light carving emotional contours into every frame. Mike Patton's score deepens that mood, minimal, ghostly, and aching. Now, the thematic subtext ties everything together. This is a story about legacy wounds, identity, the broken promise of the American dream, and how men inherit both guilt and freedom from fathers they never truly knew. Luke's own backstory hints at a childhood shaped by absence. Now, I'm just simply theorizing here. Maybe it is those generational drift born from social political realities of American post-war decades, where broken families, disappearing fathers, and the collapse of economic security. Luke's choices are wrong, yes, but the roots of his desperation speak to a deeper national sadness. And that is why I believe maybe the audiences still talk about this film today. It touches something that is both personal and collective. Now, financially, the movie earned $47.1 million worldwide against a modest $50 million budget. Not a blockbuster by commercial standards, but a clear long-term success, especially as its reputation has grown steadily over the last decade. Now, the Shout Factory 4K release enhances this lingering emotional impact. The HDR grading gives the film a richer contrast with warm sunlight, deep greens, and atmospheric shadows that complement the story's tone. Skin textures, natural light, and ambient details become sharper without losing the film's naturalistic look. And the audio restorations opens a space for silence to breathe, an essential part of this film's emotional communication. The packaging typically uses moody artwork that capture the film's tragic beauty, emphasizing the themes of fate, fatherhood, and consequence. Now, however, there's one element that I felt fell short in this release. It's the bonus features. For a film with such rich visual language and layered character psychology, the supplemental material barely scratches the surface. There is almost no exploration of Sean Bobbitt's cinematography, no insight into lens selection, natural light philosophy, or the handheld technique that shaped the film's emotional intimacy. Even Derek Cianfrance's commentary avoids deeper discussion about the cast's body languages, choices of physical storytelling that forms the core of the film's performances. It feels as though Shout Factory simply migrated the older Blu-ray and DVD materials, especially the bonus ones, without expanding them. I wish there had been more, an essay booklet or postcards or even a slipcover to elevate the collector's experience. Instead, we only get this art featuring the main characters, the 4K and the Blu-ray, which is fine, but undeniably limited for a film that deserves more archival love. Now, one of the greatest critiques about this movie is that the film avoids turning Luke's inner life into long stretches of introspection. Director Derek Cianfrance is not really interested in portraying Luke as a poetic loner. Instead, he focuses on the cause, action, and consequence, especially the legacy wounds. on how one man's choices ripple across generations. And that is what really gives this story its power. By the time the film closes, there is an unexpected sense of relief for Lux's son. He inherits the free spirit of his father, but the film really still leaves open the hope that he won't inherit the mistake. The ending is still unpredictable, almost fragile, offering both the closure and uncertainty. It's this sense that life continues beyond the frame or beyond the pines. Now that Jason is stepping into self-discovery with both the blessing and the burden of his father's shadow. And that is why I personally love this movie. It gives you a closure without denying the chaos of life. It shows a son driving into the future not as a victim of legacy wounds, but as someone who may break the cycle, a small light that emerges from the long shadows of the past. Now this movie is a must-watch.